All right, let's see. We're starting up the week number 3, and we'll now introduce React, and we'll be staying with React for a couple weeks, about at least 3 weeks, 3, 4, and 5. We'll be using React as the front end. We'll switch to Angular a little later, I believe, right when we come back from the break. But we'll stay for React for quite a bit. So last week we introduced JavaScript and jQuery as the mechanism for being able to dynamically interact with the browser, being able to add content dynamically or read content dynamically or interact with forms and whatnot. And it's really as near to down to, and then we introduced jQuery as a small level of abstraction that allowed us to forget about any idiosyncrasies about any particular browser or vendor or version of JavaScript, so that we had a higher level API that hid all those details from us. And that's really as low level as you ever want to get to interacting directly with the browser. But instead, as applications have become more and more complex, new infrastructures have come up that allowed us to deal with that complexity. I mean, there's plenty of them out there. The ones that have become fairly most popular are React, Angular, and perhaps Vue. And so we'll play around with all these 3 client-side frameworks that try to abstract the front end and treat it as a development framework, right? So that the browser is no longer just a means of just displaying content, but it's a means of building, full application level user interfaces, right? So yeah, the first one we'll see is React. It has I think the easiest point of entry into the idea of rendering content on the front end. Angular has a heavier or steeper learning curve. So React will allow us to, not only work on one of the more popular frameworks, but also introduce a lot of concepts that will make it easier later to understand Angular. Right. So a lot of the same concepts of using components, of a single page application, and interacting, asynchronous communication with the client and the server. All those same things that we're going to learn in React are just as applicable later in Angular. So we'll just have to, increase our knowledge scope and not just jump in it cold. So yeah, so we'll do React. This week we'll talk about how React manages state at the application state. We'll see some of the limitations of how React handles state. And next week, we'll introduce an alternative way of managing state. We'll use Redux. Redux is not specifically to React, but it works well with React, a means of maintaining state on the client. One of the challenges in React of managing state is that usually it's maintained at the top level, and then the top level needs to filter down all the different state down to the components that contain other components, and managing that state at different layers of the application is it's fairly complex and cumbersome. And Redux tries to solve that, as making as a single point of maintenance for that state management. So we'll talk about Redux. Redux is also very, very popular as well. So we'll play with that. In the back end, we will also be doing some work on the back end, but mostly on the client, React and Redux. We'll introduce RESTful services week 5. Although we've done a little bit already for the user management, posting, putting, delete, but we'll start using that from be able to communicate with these RESTful services, but from React. Okay, React doesn't impose any particular, doesn't have any opinion on how a user interface should talk to the server. It leaves it up to us on how to do that. That's one of the main differences, for instance. That and several other are some of the differences between React and Angular. Angular does have an opinion on everything. It takes over your entire development lifecycle and says, this is how you do it. Whereas React, more just focuses on the rendering portion of the development side of a client-side application. So yeah, so that's one of the distinctions. We'll talk about more a little later. All right, any questions? Yes. So as we've seen in JavaScript, for instance, the JavaScript can declare variables, and it can maintain values of fields, value of a particular DOM element, so it can remember, within that particular session, within that particular window, what is currently rendered on the page, and usually we typically we would have one single JSON object that can represent the state of every single component rendered on the screen right now. And typically that state is retrieved from the server, displaying, give me the list of users or that particular user, and then copied locally on variables in JavaScript, which then trickle down to DOM representations. So managing what is in memory in the browser and how those are represented in DOM elements, how to map those two things is state management. And it becomes more complicated, complex when you have components that might contain multiple other components. If you look at one page, you might identify multiple user elements, right? You might have a sidebar, a header, a footer. In the middle, you might have multiple widgets, and each one of these little components might have lots of state behind it. Right? You have arrays to render the left-hand side. You have multiple widgets. Each widget might have multiple data. So all that has been retrieved from the server, perhaps, and then dynamically rendered on the screen. And so you might have a page which might have a subcomponent of the left-hand side, top and bottom. Then the body might have multiple widgets. So all these components need to talk to one another. So typically, React handles the state at the top, and then trickles down all these states to all the minutia component underneath, subcomponents. And it's very cumbersome, because if a component in the middle, if you have to interact with a component that's way down in the tree of components, who's going to handle that? The event. Does it trickle down all the way up to handle the event, and then trickle down all the changes all the way down to the component? All that back and forth communication between subcomponents and their parent components becomes very awkward. So we'll illustrate that this week with React without Redux, and then we'll come back with Redux and say, okay, well, here's how Redux fixes it. Okay. All right. Anything else?